Welcome back into the mental game, where this week's guest is Dr. Sara Kuburic.
I never went as far as feeling suicidal, but I definitely had moments where I was like, I don't think anyone would care, and I don't care if I wake up tomorrow.
And in this episode, Sara, aka the Millennial therapist, as many of you know her on social media, opens up about her own mental health journey, struggling with anxiety, getting married early and then divorced, and discovering her new passion to become a therapist and studying existential psychotherapy. She also talks about her first book, It's On Me, which is available everywhere. We talk about your self-love, changing your life, trying to figure out how to be the best version of yourself, all of that and much, much more coming up in this episode. But first, I want to tell you about Man Therapy. And guys, I am talking to you because, look, we have to be comfortable talking about our mental health and being vulnerable. And that's why I want you to go to mantherapy.org today. But now it is time for the latest episode here on The Mental Game with Dr. Sara Kuburic. Welcome back into the mental game. As you can see, I got a very special guest sitting next to me, the Millennial therapist, Dr. Sara Kuburic. Thanks so much for coming on the mental game.
Thank you so much for having me.
And you're wearing the Therapy is Cool shirt.
Of course I am. Thank you for the gift.
Well, you're cool, so you have to wear it. One. Also, it's hot in LA.
Very hot.
It's like 110 degrees outside. You're here for like a day and a half, and it's the hottest day of the summer.
I know. And I wear a blazer, so thank you.
Sure thing. We'll hopefully we'll be able to give out some more t-shirts then too with you rocking the Therapy is Cool. I love your story. It's so, personal and special, and it's something that, I think anyone that works in mental health, it's 99% of the people that do, it's personal to them. And so for you to make this your career and obviously do it in a new way, where I was looking through our mutual followers, I think about maybe 200 of my girlfriends. Wow. I don't have 200 girlfriends, but 200 of my friends that are girls follow you.
I was like, wow. Yeah, tell me more.
We can.
Yeah.
Just having one's hard enough at times, so I can't do 200. But I just know that you help so many people throughout your therapy practice, but also just being able to post tips and tricks on Instagram. So thank you so much for what you do.
Thank you. That's so kind. I appreciate that.
I'm trying to be nice, I guess. It's working. But I want to go through your whole background, your childhood, moving, to Canada and coming here and writing for the USA Today, starting your practice and being able to help people in maybe different ways than what they're used to. And I think it's really unique and powerful. But the first thing I start with everyone here on the mental game is, what does mental health mean to you? And it's a unique question because we all go through our own unique journeys. I gave you a heads up before we started rolling. You're like, okay, this is big.
Barely a heads up.
Sorry, 30 seconds ago.
Yeah,
so I'll ask you formally now. Yeah. What does mental health mean to you?
I think mental health is just the experience of being human. I think it is humanity itself. There is no person without mental health, without mental struggles, without the difficulties. And so for me, I just tie that up with being human. So mental health is just part of being human.
Well, if you don't have your mental health, you have nothing. I talk about it all the time, with these athletes I used to work with as a sports reporter. They take so much care about your physical health, but if you don't have your mental health, you can't perform on the field, on the court, or, just in regular life with your job or work or whatever you want to do as a passion. When did you first consider your mental health? I didn't even think about it until maybe I was 25. So it took a long time for me to figure it out.
Similar. Well, which is ironic because I was already in grad school to be a therapist. And there was a healthy dose of denial of what I was going through. And I was like, I'm fine. I'm totally okay. And I think part of it is the pressure of being fine as a therapist. So if I'm in the program, there was an assumption of I have to have my shit together.
Yep.
There is no space for my humanity or kind of my pain. And so I was, in my early 20s. I think I was 22, 23. in grad school. I got married super young, and I was just checking off all the boxes, and I was so miserable. So miserable. I have never hated myself more than during that time, which was, I think, ironic for a lot of people because they would come up to me and say things like, wow, you must be so proud. You're doing such great things. You're awesome. Like patting me on the back.
Yeah.
And I didn't know how to tell them, like, I don't actually want any of this except the psych part. And so I started to develop panic attacks. And that is the first time, which if you know anything about my story of like surviving through wars and immigrating to Canada, but it was only then that I started to be like, oh, maybe I'm not okay. And maybe there are things from my past that are manifesting right now. And it was purely because my panic attacks forced me into it, not because I was like sitting there being like, how can I be better?
Yeah. Also, did you ever go to therapy before like going to grad school? No?
No, I didn't. I hung out with a lot of therapists. We had lots of conversations.
Yeah.
I was like, therapy is cool, but I don't need it.
Yeah.
And I think when I was younger, my family couldn't afford it. And I think that, you know, as immigrants, that was not like a luxury that we could, you know. And I think it's also when you're surrounded by people who have all experienced the same trauma, it's normalized. So instead of being like, hey, remember that bomb shelter we were in and we did such and such? And that was like a normal dinner conversation. While when I said it to others who haven't shared that experience, they will look at me and be like, wait, what? And gradually I started to realize that like some of those experiences weren't quote unquote normal. And that perhaps I should go to therapy, but everyone around me wasn't going to therapy. Everyone around me felt it. So I was like, I'm good.
So that goes into the stigma question then.
Absolutely.
I mean, so many people deal with it. I was telling you before, I'm lucky to speak with so many kids and companies and colleges just like you do, and realizing that we're finally talking about it, because both of our stories, we didn't talk about it for a majority of our lives, the trauma that we went through. I feel like the last 5 years has been a big turn. For you, was stigma the biggest thing? Maybe even, you know, not like consciously thinking that way, but just because, like you said, your family and friends treated it as it was normal.
Yeah. I think it was lack of awareness at first. But I think having the kind of breakdown while training to be a therapist was the stigma. It was like, how am I meant to help someone if I don't have my shit together? And I think that was that made me question what does it mean to be a therapist? What does it mean to help? Can a wounded healer heal? And I think there was a lot that I had to figure out, but the suffering was so severe that despite all the stigma, I just needed help. I think I wouldn't have made it otherwise.
Well, with finding that, you know, need for having those panic attacks when you're in grad school, training to be a therapist, that is like, I hate to put it this way, it's like the perfect storm of maybe not being able to get to that finish line to actually help people as a therapist. How did you take care of yourself first? Because, you know, I'm not a therapist myself. I've been in therapy for 4 or 5 years now, but I talk with so many people that, you know, work in the mental health field. It's like you have to take care of yourself before you can help others. Did you take care of yourself before you were able to get to that finish line?
I actually think it made me a much better therapist when I started having panic attacks. And for a while, I would see clients before it got really bad. And, you know, I was an intern. Let me clarify, like I wasn't a certified therapist. And they would sit there and I would have a lot of clients that suffered from anxiety or panic attacks, and I would describe them to them and they'd be like, yes, that's exactly how I feel. How did you know? No one ever gets it right. And I sat there being like, oh, I can now relate to you in a way I never could have before. Because reading about a panic attack and experiencing a panic attack are not the same thing. And so it was actually really encouraging to see how my perceived brokenness at that point made me relate to other people in a deeper, more meaningful way. I had to take a break when my panic attacks got really frequent, and then I worked on myself and then came back and finished a program. And so I definitely had to take care of myself because there's only so much you can give. And if you don't want a therapist who's having a panic attack with you, preferably not what you want. And I would have never put my clients in that position. And so it was kind of cool to be like, in order to help you, I need to help myself, and kind of hold yourself accountable for the role that you play in people's lives. And so it was a cool and humbling experience.
Well, it had to change your perspective on your entire, you know, career and what you wanted to do, because now it was even more personal to you. You had been through traumatizing things, but maybe hadn't addressed them yet.
100%.
Now it's like, oh, I've been through it too. I can help people even better. So I'm sure that even motivated your purpose even more, right?
Oh, yeah. And I think the way that I approached people's suffering changed completely. I think I was really like solution focused at the start. I was like, let's fix this. And I think once you see what it's truly like to experience it, you're like, oh, let's navigate this. Let's
Yeah.
explore this. Let's embody certain parts. Let's release other parts. And I think it became less medical, if I can say that,
Yeah.
in terms of like, you're not a project, you're a human being. And I think it humanized the experience further.
A project, not a human being. Is that what you said?
Yeah, like
Okay.
and I think sometimes it's easy to become very medical about it and
Yeah.
or become very like, oh, they're suffering with this. Let's just give them this tip and this tool and get them out the door.
Right.
And I think it shifted my perspective of like, what do we really need in order to heal? What is healing? And ask these more existential questions, which led to then me becoming an existential psychotherapist.
Well, that was where my next question was going to go. Existential psychotherapy. It's something that, I do talk therapy with my therapist that saved my life. I was on medication. I didn't tell you this before, but I had to check into a mental health hospital because I was suicidal 2 years ago. And
I'm so sorry.
that really, saved my life. And it gave me the tools that you're talking about. That it didn't fix it right away, but it gave me the tools and the resources to like take those steps forward to get help, hopefully feel better, feel happy, and find that self-love that I was always missing. But what is different about the type of therapy that you practice? Because it's something that I think a lot of people that maybe watch this show haven't heard of before.
Yeah, it's actually a therapy that changed my life because when I went into grad school, I really was interested in CBT and I was really interested in like the Freudian psychoanalysis sort of perspective. And then when I was going through it, really going through it, I was also being trained in existential analysis. And I loved it because it really, really pushes the concept of responsibility and authenticity and meaning and death and isolation and all these really heavy topics that I think I was grappling with for a long time. And instead of just making me feel better, I think it just brought a mirror and I got to look at myself for the first time. And that was overwhelming in itself because not looking at yourself, not seeing yourself, not knowing yourself for 20 something years is a weird feeling.
Yep.
And I think it just brought everything to light. And I wouldn't say it was the most comfortable experience, but I think it literally saved my life. And that's what I love about the existential sort of perspective. It's we are not scared to get messy. It is messy. And it made me comfortable with the mess. And it made me go, okay, but what role are you playing in your own suffering? And that was life-changing.
You mentioned the mirror, and this is something I say like a broken record. You can have all the help in the world, an amazing therapist, great supportive friends, family members, coworkers, teammates, whoever it is. But if the person in the mirror, you doesn't want to make that change, it's never going to happen.
It's never gonna
And I
happen.
got to a rock bottom moment where finally I, realized I can't live anymore. I've had friends that I've lost to drug addiction or to suicide that unfortunately never wanted to make that change themselves. And so I think that is really powerful. And you mentioned how it changed and saved your life. What about it and that philosophy where it is that person in the mirror makes it so efficient to helping people, including yourself?
I think you can't change things if you don't know they need to be changed. You can't heal a wound you don't know is there.
Right.
And I think a lot of the time it manifests in odd ways. So I would have like relationship patterns that were not healthy and I did not know where that was coming from. I was making decisions that were not based on how I perceived myself, rather how people perceived me.
Yeah.
So it was just manifesting in so many unhealthy ways. And you don't know. I felt broken, and I say like I felt broken without knowing when I broke. Like I didn't know where did I go wrong? Like I'm doing everything right. How did this happen? And I was so frustrated. And I think looking in a mirror and being like, actually, all the things you don't like, yes, there were really difficult situations in your life, but a lot of the things you don't like was actually by your choice. Like you created this reality that you're in, or you at least co-created this reality that you're in. And so that was like, well, if I can create the reality I'm in right now, that means I can create a different reality rather than being like, I'm fully a victim to this situation, which then means I don't have any autonomy to change it. And so I think for me, responsibility was actually empowerment.
For you, this is a show that obviously you can open up as much as you want to. And I'm respectful of boundaries, of course. But you mentioned the word broken and
Mm-hmm.
wounds and you didn't know what they were, and then you found them. I can only, guess based off of some of the context clues you've given of maybe what have happened, but I want to ask you directly, if you're okay sharing, what were some of those wounds, whether they be relationships, school, the panic attacks, what really put you in that? I don't know if that was your rock bottom moment.
Yeah, I was.
What was your rock bottom then? What put you there, you think?
I think because as a child, I lived through 2 wars. I think what happened in my mind was I went into survival mode. And then I never left survival mode for 20 years. I didn't leave it. And all the decisions I made were fear-based. They were not authentic. They were not thought out. They were not intuitive. It was very much, I need to protect myself, so I'm going to do the things that I think are going to do that. And that's how I act in relationships too. I need to protect myself from this person, so I'm going to be avoidant, or I'm going to be anxiously avoidant.
Yeah.
The nice, sweet combo. I'm not going to communicate. For example, something I was really known for is I'm not going to communicate when I'm upset because I don't want you to leave me. But then I'm just going to leave you when I've had enough, and you're going to be really confused. And that was cute. So, there's things. And then I was unhappy and I was alone because I was like, well, nothing works out. And I think this self-preservation held me for a really, really long time.
Yeah.
And I think that drove a lot of decisions that then made me very unhappy and I betrayed myself as a result. And I think being betrayed by someone is one thing. Betraying yourself is another. And I think that was the most painful part of my journey, was realizing like, I actually kind of did this to myself. That was a hard pill to swallow.
Well, it's a self-reflection of, I'm in this moment because of me.
Yeah.
How do I get out of it? And the alone feeling you talk about, I mean, when that hits, I've experienced it. So many people have. It's so debilitating and scary because you do feel like you're the only one in the world that is in the situation that feels like me. Did you ever battle suicidal thoughts during that time?
No, when I look back at like college and high school, I was really sad a lot. And I remember one night, actually, as you're talking, I've never really talked about it. I remember one night in college being in my bed and just crying. I was so lonely. And I remember being like trying to list people I thought cared about me. And like having such a hard time in that moment thinking of people that cared about me, when in reality, there were lots of people that cared about me. And I was like, and then I remember having a moment, well, this friend, and being like, wow, how did I not put her on the list? And really battling sort of this low sense of depression. I think I had like a hum of depression for a really long time without realizing that's what it was.
Yeah.
And I think anxiety was almost my way of getting out of it. It was like bringing life into me. I think my mind was like, well, this didn't work. Let's see if this works. I never went as far as feeling suicidal, but I definitely had moments where I was like, I don't think anyone would care, and I don't care if I wake up tomorrow. And I definitely felt that throughout, especially maybe like moments in college and some in high school.
It's really scary when you have that question in your head, or you say that statement of like, no one would care if I wouldn't be here tomorrow, or I don't care if I would be here tomorrow. But when you're able to use your own story and experience to not only bounce back, but to help other people, and we keep saying it, but you have to help yourself and realize that person in the mirror, oh, I'm responsible for some of this. I got to help me first. But you have done that in such a unique way. And you started talking about, your practice and different things that you're doing now. That jump from the struggling person right out of college, freshly married, having the dream life that everyone sees on the outside, but that internal struggle, to now, how did you feel that journey progressed? Because you can look back to however many years ago that was and go, oh, how did I get out of that? But now you probably don't even recognize that person.
No, I don't. And thank God.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I don't recognize me from 2-3 years ago.
Yeah, I'm like, oh man, if I looked in a mirror and I saw her, that would be disheartening. I think a lot of what I've done with my life and my career just mirrored what I did internally. So none of this was planned. Like I very much was like, okay, I'll get my doctorate. I'll work in a clinic. Maybe I'll write a book one day, but that's it.
Yeah.
And I think the more I kind of sank into my authenticity and into who I was, I started to see different opportunities. And I always thought my work would be really micro-focused, like one-on-one work. And then it was really cool to be like, hey, maybe I can have a greater impact. And I think something I've been very sort of dedicated to was making sure all my decisions were authentic.
Yeah.
Because for so long they weren't.
Mm-hmm.
And not to let fear prevent me from trying different things. And
Yeah.
so I really, the advice I give is like, don't overcommit to one version of yourself. Because if you do that, I would have never tried writing for USA Today or started my Instagram account or the numerous things I'm doing now, because I would have been like, well, I'm a therapist and that's all I am. And so I think always having like this fluid sense of identity where you're exploring and allowing life to be playful and creative was really important in like developing sort of what I have now, which I love. And it feels like a safe space to express myself and also try new things.
Well, you can't just put yourself in a box, or you're never going to get out of that box or see or try anything new. And you mentioned the word creative and you said Instagram, like to realize that you had this gift to be able to just talk so openly and conversationally and be able to help people. I won't say it's effortlessly because you put a lot of effort into what you do, but people have different talents. This is obviously a big talent of yours. And to be able to have that following grow, and once you see it start working and realize you are able to help this big group of people, what was that like for you seeing that work? Because it wasn't something you ever thought you were going to do.
Mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Genuinely. I started it and I was like, I'm gonna give myself 6 months. I was traveling at the time doing research in Jordan and doing my doctorate in Vienna, Austria, and I was just all over the place. And I was like, I want to do advocacy work. I want to have a community. I want to figure out what to do as, a new psych. And and I was like, no one's gonna read words. Like that's not a thing on Instagram, like this was like 2019. I was like, but a friend's like, just try it, Sarah. And I remember being kind of embarrassed because the only people following me were my friends, and my mom would like my post, and I was
would she comment too?
Yeah, she would like hand emojis like, love you, mom.
My mom still does that to this day. I'm like,
my mom does
there's
that sometimes.
Thousands of people that see this stuff now. Stop commenting that you love me. We can talk on the phone about
I know,
it. I love you too.
I love you too. But that's great support. She'll still like DM me about a post, but like, I like this one. I'm like, thanks, mom. Or she'll be like, I'm not so sure about, and I'm like, thanks, mom.
Yeah, thank you.
So I like started it, and I didn't think, I was hoping to get like 5,000 followers by the end of the year. I was like, that would be great. And I had no idea what I was getting into. So it ended up, my community means so much to me. It was such a cool way to challenge me to kind of relay some of this really intense, heady psych stuff and make it accessible and also connect to people and keep a pulse on like what's happening, what are people struggling with. And so it's been so rewarding, and it was an absolute accident, like complete accident.
But a good accident.
The best accident. Like it was the best accident, but I wasn't like, I'm going to be an influencer. Well,
now you're influencing a new generation of people that are open to the idea of getting help, where maybe seeing a video of yours or you post a lot of words, like you said, throughout your profile and on the feed, but someone that might not have ever thought about therapy before or thought about talking to their friends and family now see you talking about it or writing about it. You're able to help them take that first step. How rewarding has it been for you, especially coming up in your background where you didn't talk about mental health, you didn't go to therapy, there was this stigma, even if you didn't know there was, to now where you are able to see like the fruits of your labor, where people literally comment, hey, I'm going to go to therapy now, or hey, this helped me. Like, how much does that motivate you every day when you continue
so much.
this?
It makes me like tear up when you talk about it. I feel like when someone wants to, and not even just go to therapy, because maybe that's not for you, but just wants to reflect or like evoke something in you.
Yeah.
That to me is like the fact that I have the privilege of doing that to a bunch of people is insane.
Right.
And I never want to pretend that I know the answers to all of life's questions or I know exactly what you should do. But the fact that you're thinking about your mental health because of something you read is incredibly rewarding. And I think that's why I'll never stop, because it's like, wow, I have impact. And I think to me that is what gives my life meaning. And I think the second that stops being true, I don't know.
Yeah, well, it's the purpose that you find, even if you do it by accident. Like, I never thought I was going to stop being a sports reporter and doing these NFL games, but then I thought of the idea of like, why didn't I speak up about how I was feeling, or why didn't I go get help? And it was because of the stigma. So my hope is that someone that it's kind of hard with your profession because people that follow you know that you're a therapist. I hope they're going to therapy. You're taking care of their mental health. But like if somebody sees one of these, big badass NFL players sit down with me and cry and talk about alcoholism or losing their father or whatever,
Wow, yeah.
they go, oh, wait, he went to therapy and he's this big badass dude.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I can too. That was the whole goal behind starting the show. For you, you still practice like one-on-one therapy as well, right?
Yeah.
How has that been for you balancing the two?
Really fun. I always say I will never stop doing it because that's the heart and the soul of it.
Yeah.
So I don't have as much time to do it anymore. It's become a smaller part of what I do, but it's my favorite part of what I do. And there's just something so special about the therapeutic relationship that I don't know how to describe to people unless they do it. And I remember a supervisor of mine during my doctorate studies was like, master's, he was like, there is nothing, no relationship will ever replace a therapeutic relationship. No relationship can ever feel the same way. He's not saying better. He's just saying it's so unique. And I think every time I sit across my client, I'm like, wow, this is so special. And so, yeah, I still see clients, still my favorite part of what I do.
That's awesome. If I can I ask you some therapy questions? This isn't a therapy session.
Okay, yeah.
I maybe phrased that the wrong way. Like my favorite part about therapy is that it's an unbiased person that just wants to help you find the best version of yourself or find how to love yourself or to be happy. Like my therapist who, it's so funny looking back. She's the complete opposite from me. She is a older white lady, probably in her like 40s, 50s. That's not that old, but I'm saying older than me.
Yeah.
And had never seen me on TV, didn't know who any of the NFL players were. But I love her for many reasons, but because she just wanted to find how to help me the best, whether it was my relationships, the alcoholism, the depression. Do you find it easier for clients when they I'm not saying don't relate to their therapist, but for me, like having that objective third party that doesn't know you or doesn't feel the same way as you about everything, I think it's better that way.
I think it can depend. I'm trying to go through it. My therapist also, a woman in her like 50s who was like a screenplay writer before she became a therapist in her 40s. And it was so cool because I was like, you've had such a wild life. Like in Amsterdam, I was like, I can't relate to any of this. And I liked it because she brought so much perspective and she was so not in my world.
Yeah.
And yet I do find us sometimes having someone be like, hey, I've been there and I know exactly how hard it is to get hate on social media. And I know exactly how difficult it is to go through something like that can also be helpful.
Sure.
So I think it really depends. I think a therapist should theoretically be able to do both really well. I think it depends what I'm struggling with, but I like both.
Okay. Yeah. So there wasn't a right answer.
Yeah. I was like, that was so lame. But I think it depends.
I stress to everyone the answer is different for each one of us. Like, talk therapy and medicine might work for me, but something more holistic or a different type of approach might work for someone listening or watching or for you. And so you have to be open to all that. I say the word open and we've said the other word change a lot that keeps coming up in my mind because for me, that's the thing I struggled with the most in my life that I didn't realize until my therapist told me directly, like, you struggle with change. That's the number one thing. And it's super common. I think if I'm remembering right through looking through your post, change is something that you've talked about a lot and dealing with that self-change, the changes, whether it's relationships, jobs, different things in your life. How difficult has it been for you to accept the change in your life, but then flip it and be able to help people with their change? I mean, that's a huge thing that people struggle with.
Yeah, change is hard. It's scary because it's the unknown and you're like, what if it's worse?
Right.
Like, what? And then I think a lot, I wish I had a story where it was like, I was so enlightened and I was like, it can be better. I'm just going to try it. It really wasn't. It was like, it can't get worse, so it must be better. That's the point to which I came. And I hope that's why on Instagram, I'm really trying to promote change because I don't think people have to hit rock bottom before they experience it.
Yeah.
I think a lot of us are just like, it's okay. We settle. And he seems less scary and we're like, it's fine. And it's like, is it fine? Is there ways that you can take care of yourself that would be better? And for me, change was horrifying. And, something I tell my clients all the time is when you say I don't have a choice, 90% of the time, that is not true.
Correct.
You just don't want the consequences of that choice.
Yeah.
It's very, very different. So it's like, well, I'm married and I have a kid. I don't have a choice. It's like, no, you do have a choice. You might not want to get divorced and you might, not want to impact your kids that way. Or I don't have a choice. I have this job. Well, you could make less money and take a different job. So
Yeah.
I think it's important to realize all the choices we do have. And then whatever we choose, take ownership of it. And so whenever I'm working with someone, I'm like, okay, you're presenting like you don't have a choice in this situation. Theoretically, hypothetically, what are all the choices you do have that you're not choosing right now? And I'm not saying that you should be choosing them. I just think you need to, even if you stick to the same thing in your head, when you go, this is a choice, it feels very different than an obligation.
Yep.
And so for me, choice is like a huge thing when it comes to change. Because it has to be your choice and you have to realize you're making it.
You have to choose to make the change.
Exactly.
And it might be scary in that moment, but long term, you realize how much it helps you. You mentioned as an example, divorce or relationships. I think that's something that most people do struggle with when it comes to the word change. I know for me, that's been the whole feeling of being alone my whole life. And then when I hit rock bottom, it was like I had this relationship that ended up being toxic and really tough and breakup. But like relationships, how often do you see that being maybe the driving force behind somebody's mental health, maybe being unhealthy? I mean, it's something that I struggled with, number one, for so long.
Oh, it's so frequent.
Yeah.
Or not wanting to change because you're going to change the dynamic. You're like, what if they don't like me if I'm setting boundaries? What if they don't like me if I quit my job? What if they don't? And I think we become so codependent so quickly a lot of the time.
Yeah.
I think we're trying to be loved and fulfill this need of belonging, which is there, and we should fulfill that, but maybe in a healthier way. And so there's so much fear wrapped around it.
Right.
People get a lot of I must be pretty and I must be worth it if someone wants me. So self-worth is tied to it. So relationships often, I think relationships can either heal you or wound you.
Yeah.
And I think some of the best healings I've done have been through relationships. And then some of the worst moments in my life have been through relationships. And so I think we take it lightly. I don't think we take it seriously enough. And this is not just romantic relationships. This is friendships. This is family. Of like, your relationships will mold you. They will impact your mental health in such a significant way. And we need to start taking that seriously rather than like, I just went on a couple dates. And like, it doesn't matter. Like, let's just have fun with it. And it's like, but how is it impacting you?
Right.
And so I think a lot of people just don't take it seriously enough.
Well, one, every relationship that you have matters and it does affect you. But the most important is the relationship with yourself.
100%.
And if you don't take that serious or learn how to take care of yourself, that's when all the problems and things that we've talked about, struggles with mental health, come into the picture. For me, I wasn't okay being alone or being just me until like a year and a half ago. It's such a strange feeling. Like now, like I don't go on the dating apps anymore. I haven't been on a date like since that breakup, really. Just not because I don't want to, find my wife and have kids one day, but it's just pouring all that energy into me and then realizing, oh, I'm okay just chasing my career or being happy on my own. It's this light bulb moment. But when it comes to, the change and wanting to have those relationships, it really comes with the self relationship first, right?
100%. And I think it'll manifest. The way you treat yourself, the way you understand yourself is going to manifest in your relationships.
Yeah.
And what I see often, and in my book, I talk about self-loss.
Yeah.
It's people who don't know who they are, who are attempting to be in relationships. This is so confusing to you and to the other person.
Yeah.
And so something I say is like, if you don't know who you are, who is this person dating? Like,
very true.
And it's not that you're doing this maliciously to them. It's like you're trying to figure it out. But I think if you don't have that relationship to yourself to anchor you, you're going to drift with the relationship, or they're going to mold you more than they should, and maybe not even intentionally. I think people can take advantage of you. You can end up in abusive relationships more easily. And so, I think unless you know who you are, relationships are tougher. And, something that I say that's maybe a hot take, unless this person is helping you become more yourself, you probably shouldn't be in a relationship with them. That doesn't mean that they're like, there's codependency, but it's like they are supporting you in a way where you're becoming more authentic, more you. Otherwise, I don't think they have a place in your life.
Yeah. Well, not to throw all my dirty laundry out there, but
Please.
look, my entire life story's on the internet except my ex's name, which I like joke about, but respectfully, like I don't
Yeah.
want that being brought up.
That's nice of you.
Yeah, I try
Yeah.
to be nice. And you look back and you think, oh, it's all this person's fault. Like, no, you did some things too. It's a
Yeah.
mutual thing. But looking back just at that relationship, now that I'm thinking about it with things that we're talking, it's like the change that you have to make yourself. Like both of us had things that we were holding on to, whether it be past relationships for her or me wanting this new relationship to work out so bad, like just all this pressure. When you don't take care of yourself, like in those things first, you mentioned the word mess, it just makes it extremely messy.
Yeah. And I'm not saying you have to be fully healed, whatever that means, to be in a relationship. But I do think you have to be able to identify your wounds and your triggers in order to make it work. So you need to be at least aware enough that you have them and what you're bringing into the dynamic.
Yeah.
And being really transparent, like, hey, this triggers me, or hey, when I do this, maybe it comes from such and such. Can you flag it for me? Can we work through it? I think a lot of people feel this pressure to be perfect before they can have a healthy relationship, and there's no such thing.
That's perfect, yeah.
But you got to know where your shit comes from.
Yep.
Otherwise, you're going to not even understand it's you who's doing it. You might project it onto the other person. And, we hurt each other in relationships. Like, we're the ones that get hurt sometimes, but we also probably not knowingly hurt other people. And we need to, again, take it more seriously.
Well, like one example I can think of that's extreme, but it's very, very, not extreme because it's bad, but extreme because it's something that I had no idea in the moment, but I was struggling with the suicidal thoughts and I was putting all of it into that relationship and it being, my ex's fault. And I learned through the breakup and through things later on that she had a parent that was suicidal that blamed the suicidal thoughts on her as a child.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Like I had no idea. And so that made me feel horrifically bad and rightfully so. But, we were never open in the relationship about our mental health. And so I didn't know that. But those triggers that you talk about, I mean, they can affect things at such a deep level.
Such a deep level. And you might not even know what's happening for you. Like you might just find yourself being aggressive or defensive.
Yeah.
And then that's all you see. That's all the other person sees. And no one sees where it's coming from. And everyone is confused.
Yep.
And, if you've known, maybe you would have pivoted, and maybe if she knew what you were going through and maybe where your stuff was coming from and maybe what was making you hesitate towards taking some responsibility. I don't know what the situation is. I'm making things up.
No, it's okay.
I'm like, I think that would have made that a safer space.
Sure.
But I think that's so much easier said than done. And
Oh my
I'm
God,
sitting
yeah.
here being like, well, we could have. And it's like, I've been in same situations where it's like, I'm incredibly triggered or they're incredibly triggered and our triggers are talking to each other and we're like blissfully unaware of what's happening.
Yeah.
And you're like, there's just the worst person ever. And it's like, okay, well,
No, we both did stuff. We didn't know what we were doing. And
absolutely.
while listening to this episode, you've heard both Sara and I talk a lot about self-love and feeling alone, whether it be after losing our relationships or just struggling with anxiety, depression, and just that loneliness that we feel sometimes throughout life. And that's why I want you to always know we can take care of our mental health. And there's so many amazing resources out there, especially for men just like me. It's called Man Therapy. Go to mantherapy.org today and check out their amazing tools, tips, and resources all around mental health to help you feel comfortable being vulnerable and being the best version of yourself. They have this amazing thing called their 18-point head inspection. It's a quick 2-minute test that asks you basic questions about your everyday life, your mood, your interests, and your mental health to help you take the best care of your mental health today. Go take that. Again, it's their 18-point head inspection. It takes just 2 minutes at mantherapy.org. Suicide can be tough to talk about, and that's why the Happiness Project is helping break the stigma. After losing their classmate Nick, his friends knew they had to do something to help save lives. So that's when the Happiness Project was born, a clothing brand to raise awareness for mental health and suicide prevention, with t-shirts and hoodies just like this to start a conversation and let people know they are not alone. To learn more, follow @Happiness Project on social media and use the code MENTALGAME on your first order for 15% off at happinessproject.com. It's just, it's wild to look back on some stuff, but you grow as people and you look in the mirror. We keep talking about change, but you mentioned in your book the self-loss aspect. I think that is such a key thing to think about, because you do lose so many things in life just in general. But when you're talking about yourself, and we keep talking about looking in the mirror, that self-loss philosophy, can you just walk me through that a little bit? Because I think it is really, really powerful.
Thank you. Yeah, I was like, why does no one talk about this phrase?
Yeah.
And I wish I knew that that's what I was experiencing, because I didn't have a word for it. I always was like, I'm broken. I'm deeply, deeply unhappy. And I don't really feel like I own my own life, you know? And then obviously through existentialism, I like stumbled upon the phrase. Actually, the phrase came out a lot in my research. I was like, oh, this is it.
There's an answer.
There's an answer. And I think self-loss is that moment of genuinely not owning yourself, not recognizing yourself. It's doing things and being shocked by it. It's like being on autopilot for so long that you wake up and go, how and what is my life?
Yep.
And it's not... It's sort of like your perception of who you are and your actions do not align. You're just like, I have this whole perception of who I am, and then I'm looking at my life and I'm going, well, no, I don't think so. Who am I? And it's really, we confuse ourselves. And so I think it's that moment of emptiness and confusion and frustration and anger. And then I have a less pleasant definition, which is self-loss is our failed responsibility to be ourselves.
It's direct.
It's very direct. So if you like direct this type of content, it has a bit of that in there, because I do think at the end of the day, we're the only ones responsible for being ourselves.
Yeah.
And when we fail to do that, we might find ourselves lost, which is so painful.
How do you find healthy coping mechanisms for yourself then in those moments where you are broken and you haven't taken that responsibility? And obviously like, read the book and hear everything there. Sorry, I want to make sure I do the right plug here. But you also have to like, there's things that you can go to therapy, sure, but there are other things that you found that really do help people, including yourself, that when you are struggling with that self-loss.
Yeah. First of all, it's normal.
Yeah.
Like, you're not broken, you're human. And I think normalizing that is really important. I think the other misconception is that authenticity or the self is found.
Yeah.
And I push against that, where I think it's created. Found implies it's somewhere either in the past, which is what people assume, like if only I could go back before I was in this relationship, or before I became a parent, or before. And so they have these romanticized versions of themselves.
Yeah.
Or it implies that like someone other than you created this ideal version of you. And I always like to go like, well, who did that? Yeah. So it's like, I think authenticity is participation. I think it's choice. I think it's freedom. I think it's how you engage with your own existence. And so for me, it's like, you can create your authenticity. That's what I tell people. And you can do that through reading, getting in touch with your body through sports, through movement. I use Julia Roberts as an example in her movie Runaway Bride.
Okay.
Probably not, something you've watched many times or ever.
I think I've watched it once.
Yeah, fair enough. But there was a really cool scene where she used to just pretend that her character to like eggs the same way that the people she was dating liked. So if like they like scrambled eggs, she'd be like, yeah. And if it's poached, she'd be like, yeah, whatever. There's a whole scene, a whole story. Yeah. And then there's this powerful scene where she goes home after someone calls her out, and she makes dozens of eggs, and she's just sitting there alone trying all the eggs. And that I think is the perfect example of trying to encounter yourself and figure out what is authentic, what works, what aligns, what resonates, what's home. And so when people are in this situation, it's like, you don't need to just know. How, like, this whole thing, like, you'll just know, I think is a little ridiculous and puts a lot of pressure on people. Sometimes it works and and I think that's beautiful. And sometimes you have to sit there and try the eggs. And that's my advice, is like, try things on and see if they work, if they feel like you, and if they don't, try something different.
So what's your favorite type of egg?
I actually like hard-boiled eggs.
Wow, okay.
Or scrambled.
Like with Tabasco on them or anything?
Yeah,
okay.
Oh my God. Like a little bit of salt, a little bit of Tabasco.
There you go. All right. I didn't think we were going to go into our breakfast brunch talk.
Yeah. I love I'm a big brunch person. Yeah.
That's awesome. We talked about, your career, the book, everything you're doing now. Are there exciting things coming up? I know you're between New York, Australia. You're in LA right now for like 36 hours.
Yeah.
What do the next few months look like for you? What's coming up?
I'm going to be in New York working on some Projects, super vague.
Sorry, I'm
Some
putting you on the spot.
podcasts.
Yeah.
No, there's lots of things I'm excited about. But something I started is called the Phenomenological Society.
Say that again?
Phenomenological Society.
Phenomenological
Society.
Okay, got it.
It's a philosophy concept, and it's just about helping people be really present and engage with their existence, and it's a bit more philosophical. And so we're kind of working on building this project up where people can really connect online but also offline.
Yeah.
So that's something I'm really passionate about. Maybe start thinking about book 2. Who knows? Lots of things.
Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome. I love the idea of like being present. It's something that I never really did my whole life. You mentioned the word autopilot. I did that for so long, especially as a drinker, and it's so hard to break habits. Last thing I want to ask you, unless there's something you want to add, just advice to someone that wants to follow in your footsteps. I ask that to athletes or musicians, actors all the time. You have many hats that you wear, but for maybe a young woman or young girl listening that hasn't really found that purpose yet and is just in search of it, what advice would you give someone like her?
Oh my gosh, that's a really good question. I think meaning is something also we create and don't find. And I think it's also really tied to who you are. So something that's meaningful to someone else might not be meaningful to you.
Yeah.
And I think it's like asking 2 questions like, what do you want to live for? And what are you willing to die for? Because they're not always the same. And sometimes it's really helpful for me to be like, what am I willing to die for? That's like a really big question for me.
Yeah.
And so there's some existential seeds being sown here, but asking yourselves questions like that and understanding that you can create your own meaning in anything you do, conversations, your work. It doesn't have to just be in your work. And also that your meaning might change, because what I found meaningful in my 20s is definitely not what I find meaningful in my 30s. And I hope it's different in my 40s.
Well, you're definitely living your true purpose and delivering on the meaning. So thank you so much for everything you do. It's been really fun chatting with you today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And therapy's cool.
Therapy's cool. Even though I'm not an athlete, thanks for having me.
We have different people on than just athletes. I'll show you the wall after this with all the guests. But thank you so much, Sara, for coming on. This has been a great time talking with you.
Thank you.
We'll see everybody right back here next week on The Mental Game. And I love that conversation with Sara. As you can tell, she is just a very cool, down-to-earth person. And you can also tell why so many people love the way she talks about mental health. And she's known as the Millennial Therapist on Instagram and all across social media. She just gives it to you in a real, relatable way, especially for millennials like myself, Gen Z, and the younger generations when talking about mental health. So I can't thank her enough for really opening up about why she wanted to be a therapist and her mental health journey. Next week, another surprise guest right back here on The Mental Game, and we are going to New York City, your one hint, news anchor. Well, I guess that's 2 words, but it's still one hint. Next week, a news anchor right back here on The Mental Game.